For months now, prosecutors have been trying to get their chief suspect to give them a sample of his blood. They say they need that blood sample to genetically link the suspect to the murder. For 30 years, radioactive waste was buried here. The carcasses of animals used in experiments, contaminated clothing, and lab debris. It was all dumped here on a daily basis. Lab officials say it was the conventional wisdom at the time, and now they know better. But he couldn't convince the judge to waive his appearance in court. So, flanked by several family members, he covered his head with a jacket and was hurried into the courtroom. To Manners, the court appears to have become a circus. In this statement given to News 12, Richard Manners praises prosecutors and detectives, but calls the court a judicial farce.
A early afternoon explosion at a propane gas distributor's has rocked Westbury.
It really has been a tense day as thousands of residents within a 10-block area were evacuated. This fireball could be seen as far away as East Meadow and Mineola. Firefighters from at least 6 companies battled the blaze. We have team coverage now, beginning with News 12's Carolyn Gusoff, who's on the scene.
Scott and Melba, it was a very intense day indeed, but the tension seems to be finally leveling off. The propane fire is now under control, and it would appear as if the danger has passed. But as you've seen all day, propane is very unpredictable, so the evacuation for this area continues. Nothing has changed in that respect, but it seems as if the fire is finally under control. It all began at about noon today with a fire at the loading dock of the Old Compression Gas Company. Workers were unable to control that fire themselves, and it quickly spread to a 1,000-pound propane tank. What happened next was very dramatic. Several smaller explosions and then the rupture of a 1,500-pound propane tank. The result was a black cloud of smoke hovering over Westbury and a very tense waiting game. About 10,000 people were evacuated, waiting for the propane to burn off by itself, hoping that it wouldn't explode. It could have potentially leveled a quarter-mile radius. Has the danger now passed? That is the big question, and joining me now, hopefully with some answers, is Thomas Galata, Nassau County Executive. What is the situation?
Carolyn, a tremendous amount of progress has been made.
No, but it was the first plane crash for U.S. Air with fatalities in 17 years. And while the airline is expressing their regret, they are offering very little in the way of answers. They say the investigation is in the hands right now of federal investigators who have been behind closed doors interviewing crew members all day. By the time federal investigators arrived at LaGuardia Airport, the rescue was over. All 63 passengers aboard U.S. Air Flight 5050 had been accounted for. 61 had survived, 2 women had died. The 737 sat split in 3, perched on a wooden pier in the East River. Investigators recovered the data and voice recorders, which they hope will help solve the mystery of what went wrong. Does it look like weather played any role?
There's no way of telling until the investigation is complete. They have to gather all this data. All that we know is that the plane apparently didn't get into the air. It just stayed on the ground from what witnesses had said, and just went into the water, and it was about 25 feet of water at the time.
Why did the pilot abort takeoff? Why did he put the brakes on in the middle of a wet runway? Those questions have yet to be answered. Passengers had no clue there was trouble till midway down the runway. There was no word from the cockpit before the plane broke apart. Then the only instruction from the flight crew was get out.
They were clinging to the bottom of the pilings underneath the dock that the people were on. They were standing on the wings. There were some people just floating around in the water. Once they got on board, it was very noticeable that it was severe trauma set in on every one of the persons that we did board.
Investigators believe that so many lives were saved in part because of this lighting pier. The pilings actually propped up the nose of the plane, enabling people to get out. The 737-400 is a new series jet. This one was in service only 8 months. It was one of the Piedmont planes which became part of the U.S. Air Fleet when the 2 carriers merged back in March. The crew was also from Piedmont, which raises the questions. Was the crew familiar with LaGuardia Airport and with U.S. Air aborted takeoff procedures?
The Piedmont merger has nothing to do, in our opinion, with this accident.
Do you have misgivings about this particular model?
I have no misgivings. The Boeing 737-400 is an outstanding piece of equipment.
That doesn't end the speculation. In a similar incident back in 1986, a Piedmont 737 skidded to a stop in Charlotte. There were injuries in that incident, too. But U.S. Air says its fleet is fine. They don't think it requires review. Of course, the National Transportation Safety Board will have the final say. At LaGuardia Airport, Carolyn Gusoff, News 12, Long Island.
She's got more. Carolyn.
Carolyn Lee, the New York Blood Center, provides more than 90% of the blood supply in the New York area, so the potential really exists for this 4-day strike to have a large impact. But some of Long Island's hospitals, they have safeguards for this sort of thing. They have their own blood banks, and they're not overly concerned about a blood shortage. One of those hospitals is Long Island's largest. It's the Nassau County Medical Center, and joining me now is the spokesman with the hospital, Ed Smith. You have been watching Phyllis Oakley, spokeswoman with the State Department, live in Washington, D.C. She is briefing the press now on Pan Am Flight 103 air disaster. She confirmed earlier in the news conference that 255 passengers and crew members died in that tragedy, and she also confirmed that at least 4 State Department officials and other U.S. officials were on that plane, although she said that next of kin had not been notified and she could not give us their names. Finally, amid growing speculation of sabotage, she did answer some questions in that regard. She said that an unidentified caller had called the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki on December 5th, apparently a person with ties to the Abu Nidal organization, saying that a bombing attempt would be made on a Pan Am aircraft within the next 2 weeks. Why hadn't American passengers been notified? Why weren't people told other than embassy officials? She was dealing with those questions. We'll have more information as it becomes available. For now, we'll return you to our regular programming. I'm Carolyn Gusoff in the News 12 newsroom. Have a good day.
I have 11 months clean time now, and that's a real miracle. I never thought I'd be able to do that. I just always remember feeling like, how am I ever going to stop this? I just didn't see a way out.
A miracle. That's one way to describe what's happened to Barbara in 11 months, or you could call it drug treatment. By any name, it's created a person out of a zombie, a person who less than a year ago would have killed for a hit of crack.
I hadn't physically hurt anybody yet, but I was getting ready to do that. I was just at that point where I was either going to kill myself or perhaps kill somebody else.
This was Barbara 6 months ago. When we met her, she had just left the streets of South Jamaica and a diet of methadone and crack. After 20 years in and out of emergency rooms and detox centers, after 3 failed marriages and a child lost to drug use, she was trying something novel, mothering her youngest daughter, who is yet to inherit her family's disease called addiction. Today, Barbara has turned 39 and has turned a corner in her life. She's completed nearly a year of outpatient drug treatment in a Freeport program called Operation Pride.
My choices were having someone kill me on the street, getting arrested, or overdosing on drugs. And then there was one more, and that was going into treatment. And I tried it, and it's been working.
Barbara's success is unfortunately an exception. It's not that drug treatment doesn't work. She's proven that it clearly can. It's that so many other people like her never make it into drug treatment in the first place. There just aren't enough spaces at drug treatment programs on Long Island, and there's not enough money for them to expand. There are only 2 residential drug treatment programs on all Long Island, with a total of less than 200 beds. There are more people on the outside waiting to get in than on the inside getting help. This treatment home in Ronkonkoma will be Long Island's 3rd, with 65 slots for teenagers.
I think that those extra beds are only really going to be a drop in the bucket. There is a need on Long Island for literally hundreds of beds.
Logan Lewis runs the Apple Treatment Centers. He says drug treatment has proven it can be a cure, but it's also proven it can't handle the huge demand.
We have a waiting list of about 60 clients. I would say that in the next 60 to 90 days, we'll have another 60 people on the waiting list as soon as this is filled.
Waiting lists can be deadly. They destroy the fleeting incentive of the person ready to finally get help. Counselors say they often get just one chance to get an addict into treatment. If there's a waiting list, the addict loses interest. They mourn a lost generation of drug abusers for whom the war on drugs is coming too late.
We have a system that's dying on the vine, dying because it's been under
President Bush's national drug control strategy.
I'm proposing an increase of $321 million in federal spending on drug treatment.
It's money drug treatment centers desperately need, but it translates into only $50 for every drug addict in the country. And it's less than 30% of what the president wants to spend on the entire drug problem.
Society has not made that earnest commitment to the drug problem, and therefore we're still struggling to have the resources to meet the needs.
But counselors admit that all the money in the world won't solve their problems. They need changed attitudes, and it's happening in East Hampton. The East End town became the first on Long Island to actually ask for a residential facility. Officials admit it was politically risky because even people with the best intentions don't want a drug treatment center next door.
Not if it affects their own property, no.
The East End Apple Center will open in about a year. It's near the airport, in the woods, out of sight. The $1 million it will take to treat the 40 residents is hard for some taxpayers to swallow, but that too is beginning to change.
Most people are beginning to realize that incarceration costs much more money than treatment. It's cost-effective to treat people.
It saves more than money. Barbara's 22-year-old daughter has also enrolled in a treatment center. The two had the motivation to wait for the precious few slots, and they know it saved their lives.
I wouldn't give up what I have now for anything.
I feel the same way. I wouldn't go back to that ever. I don't plan on it anyway. I don't ever want to do that again.
In Freeport, Carolyn Gusoff, News 12, Long Island. Inside the hotel, 800 retired telephone employees lunched on glazed chicken and herb stuffing and reminisced about old times. It's a different New York telephone since they were on the job. This is New York Telephone today. On the menu outside the hotel, broken eggs and shouts. Hundreds of striking telephone workers were held back by police in riot gear who had come to keep the peace. The striking workers say they're not here to send a message to the retirees. They're here because New York Telephone's president, Fred Salerno, is inside, and he says he's considering hiring some permanent replacement workers if the telephone strike continues.
40,000 people out. I'm talking about 500 more people, so I'm not going to replace everybody, nor do I want to replace anybody. But clearly we have an obligation to provide service.
Oh, that's just swell. I mean, here, the average employee in Nassau County, or probably across New York Telephone, has got 18 years. 18 years of their life invested in this company, and now they're talking about replacing us?
Inside, there's not much sympathy for the striking workers outside, even though many of these retirees were at one time union faithful themselves.
Frankly, I'm a little disturbed because I paid my dues 34 years, and I come along as a retired employee, and then I agreed to buy this.
I think we're entitled after 35 years in the phone company to have a luncheon without them bugging us.
The retirees who had come here to be honored said the pickets outside had ruined their luncheon.
Well, it's ruining our lives. There are a lot of people who are hurting very bad financially. I mean, we're in our third month of the strike, and there are people who are on the verge of losing their homes. That's a great deal more serious than having an upset stomach at lunchtime. It is indeed a different New York Telephone from the one retirees remember. It's a New York Telephone in Civil War. In Uniondale, Carolyn Gusoff, News 12, Long Island. It's called Gate Cap, Civilian Action Program at the gate of the Army base. It begins at 10 a.m. every Tuesday, but the line begins to form hours before. The dental unit is a couple of chairs set up under flash bedding. 5,000 teeth completed in the first week of this program. A diet of sugar cane because lack of the most basic dental care. A few steps away, minor surgery is performed in the back of a pickup truck. Few patients complain about the pain.
Some of these people come, it takes them 2 days to walk. They come from villages, and some of them do walk 2 days. You know, they walk for miles.
They come here because there is virtually no public health system in the inaccessible Honduras. And disease is rampant. Malaria, a resurgence of polio, and a host of parasitic problems caused by bathing, walking, and resting in the mud.
Most of the problems, I think, are parasites because of the terrain here. The rivers are filled with parasites. A lot of them have colds. More, I don't think that they're malnourished. I don't think that they're malnourished as much as we think they are.
For the Army, it is invaluable training, the equivalent of treating a medical disaster. Reservists from Long Island serve as translators so doctors can try to prescribe some relief.
What's wrong with the baby? ¿Qué le pasa a la niña? ¿Al niño? Diarrhea?
But the idea that this is only a training exercise fades very fast.
This is definitely the real thing. The scope on this is phenomenal. There are people here who have never seen doctors. We're trying to bring in medical support to them.
It goes on like this every Tuesday. 200-300 Hondurans lined up for what little medical care the Army can provide in a setting like this. The question you hear most often while talking to the medics here is what happens in June when the Army packs up and goes home. The Army doctors say they feel helpless, providing momentary relief to people whose medical problems are caused by diet and environment, conditions which are not likely to change.
What's going to happen in June is when they close the project down, unfortunately the medical aspect will close. And this is a shame because these people are going to be hurting both physically and psychologically because they do not have the support that is necessary for them. And there are going to be people that are going to be dying.
In north central Honduras, Carolyn Gusoff, News 12, Long Island. 21-year-old Thomas Lydon Jr. of Rocky Point showed no emotion as a judge ordered him held without bail, but outside of court, his family sobbed. He and 19-year-old Daniel Toll of Wading River are accused of killing Leah Green as she slept in her St. James home. Prosecutors say the two were burglarizing Green's apartment when Lydon found the woman asleep in her bed and decided she'd have to be killed.
This is a situation that anybody in suburbia, anybody that owns a home, it could happen to, and that's what's so shocking about and so senseless about this case.
In a written confession to police, Lydon says he and Toll went to a friend's house on North Country Road to get speed. The friend wasn't home, so seeing the house next door was unlocked, they decided to pull off a burglary. While Toll allegedly cleared out the house, Lydon says in the confession that he stabbed Leah Green in the neck. She tried to fight me, but I held her down. I kept my hand on her heart until I felt it stop. I felt a real high, a sense of power when I stabbed her and when she died. It felt good. Later, he says, I put a blanket over the lady's head out of respect.
Lydon was on a thrill trip or power trip. He felt that sense of power that he was alive and she was dead as he stood over her body.
After the murder, a neighbor told police he saw the two men in Green's driveway loading a car with electronics. The description of the car went out on police radio, and within 3 hours, a Suffolk Highway Patrol officer spotted it right here at a Medford gas station with the suspects inside. Quite a coup considering the size of the area police had to search and the fact that they didn't even have a license plate number on the car.
It was fairly distinctive, and it was obvious to the Highway Patrol officer that this could very well be the vehicle that we were seeking.
Police say the suspects then gave voluntary written and videotaped confessions. Their arraignments were delayed for hours while the court searched for a defense attorney willing to take the case.
I can tell you at this point we are entering a plea of not guilty, and the case is not over until it's over.
Friends of Leah Green and friends of her father, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Newsday editor Robert Greene, continue to express shock. They say she was a nurse and she was fighting a fatal blood disease, and they're outraged by her violent death. Prosecutors say the sad irony is that Leah Green would probably not have been a threat to the burglars. She was quite ill, and she was fast asleep. In St. James, Carolyn Gusoff, News 12, Long Island. Lewin woke up a regular kid, one of the crowd, a 7-year-old with a mean fishing arm and a knack for Nintendo. But today, he's dressed for success. He's the lucky winner of a library contest, which means he's won the job of running the town of Riverhead for the day.
I went to the summer reading club, and they picked names out of this thing, and they picked me.
So after handing in his homework and saying goodbye to 2nd grade for a while, this tiny supervisor is on his way.
Let freedom ring.
It's off to town hall. Eric's prize includes a police escort and a briefing from the man who usually runs the town.
Smile a lot, wave a lot, and try to do the best that you can.
Next, you have to go over to the highway department and see the highway superintendent. He'd like to meet with you, okay?
Eric has taken so well to the job of supervisor that it kind of makes you wonder, if a second grader can do the job, what does that say about the man who does it for a living?
Well, I've never said that it was all that hard. I just said that you had to keep at it.
You hear that, Eric? Do you want to go into politics?
What's politics?
By the end of the day, Eric will have run a town board meeting and tangled with enough red tape to fill the town dump. Some people think he's beginning to look like the supervisor and sound like him, too.
No new taxes.
In Riverhead, Carolyn Gusoff, News 12, Long Island. It's day 3 of the phone strike, and the telephone company is blaming vandals for putting 3,000 customers on Long Island out of service today.
Now News 12's Carolyn Gusoff joins us with a look at the biggest races.
Carolyn Lee, incumbents are on the defense this primary day, fighting to keep their support after a year of some of the sharpest tax increases in recent memory. In Suffolk County, 3 incumbent legislators are facing primary challenges. All 18 legislators face re-election bids in November. Good morning, everyone. The time right now is 6:45. Checking some temperatures across Long Island. It's 61 degrees right now in Great Neck. It's 62 out in Montauk, and it's 58 in Smithtown. And making headlines this Thursday, August 10th, another possible case of meningitis is reported in Nassau County. And this time, health officials are worried there may be more. A 7-year-old boy who swam at the Bluegrass Kiddie Pool in Levittown over the weekend may have come down with the disease. Parents with children who also swam at that pool are being asked to contact their doctors. And in Suffolk County, there's another possible case of meningitis. A spokesman at Huntington Hospital confirms a patient came in overnight with symptoms of that disease. No other details are available yet. In other news, a Hicksville school bus driver remains behind bars today, and the Long Island Railroad reports all trains are on or close to schedule. The time right now is 7:03. We have the weather forecast for you. Joe Chaffee is over at the weather map. Good morning, Joe.
Morning, Karen. Very important to be on, and so on and so on. It looks like if it gets in here tomorrow, it may be here for the weekend.
Too bad. One more nice day.
Yeah, that's today.
Okay, thanks, Joe. The time right now is 7:05. Carol Silva and I have a lot more news still ahead, so stay with us.
And more weather and traffic in 10 minutes.